All right, let's switch to the Jim Harbaugh story. Of course, so many levels to this. First, let's start with your thoughts on the idea. We've heard that Michigan has put on the table this $125 million extension. We, of course, know that Jim Harbaugh several months ago, even though it was just reported recently, hired Don Yee, who's got a lot of NFL connections. Doesn't necessarily mean he's helping him with the NFL, but that's the talk. Of course, the chatter is Jim Harbaugh might jump to the NFL. What's your gut tell you, covering this team day in and day out and covering Jim Harbaugh? Where do you think he's at?
Well, I think Jim Harbaugh wants to get back to the NFL. He says much a couple of years ago when he said, there's still a kind of a goal of his to get back and win a Super Bowl. So I think that's always been on his mind. I think that's kind of, for at the beginning of his Michigan career, it was probably in the back of his head. But as things have gone on, after the 2020 controversial season when Michigan struggled, after, at the Michigan winning back-to-back Big Ten titles in 21-22, I think it became more of an idea in his head. He interviewed with the Vikings a couple of years ago. He had discussions with the Broncos last year. I think for him, it really comes down to getting an offer. I think if an NFL franchise that he respects and he looks at as views as a good situation, I think he leaves. I think there's a good chance he leaves after this season, regardless of what happens Monday night. He's got 3 years left on his contract at Michigan. Buyout is relatively low. So I think if there was ever a time for Jim Harbaugh to go, it's probably now. He had a really successful 4-year run there with the San Francisco 49ers in the early 2010s. He knows what it takes to win at that level. He's still got a lot of connections there. Obviously, his brother's still in Baltimore. So a lot going for him. And really, honestly, he's not getting any younger either. He just turned 60 years old last week. And so I think in a way he kind of views as the clock is ticking there.
Yeah, and it's interesting, too, because, listen, one of the reasons Jim Harbaugh wanted to go back to his alma mater was to turn the program around. And I think at the time, I'm paraphrasing, he said, I wanted to make the program great again. And that's where it's at. Whether they win or lose in the national championship game, Michigan is back. They've beat Ohio State. He seemed to have checked all the boxes that you'd want to do going back to your alma mater and bring the program back. It's now in such great shape that even if he leaves, they have great staff there. They'll be able to fill the void there and continue kind of the juggernaut they've built. But the whole scandal, of course, too, is there as well. How much do you think Harbaugh's desire to go back to the NFL is being aided by just the hassle of what he's dealing with?
Yeah, it's probably a factor, and it wouldn't surprise me if that was a tipping point because there's a lot of unknown with the NCAA at this point, right? They're investigating Michigan for two separate rules violations that could net him an additional suspension next year. We don't know to maybe what extent, but I do think the assumption is that he would face some type of additional game suspension. So if you're him and you're looking at the situation as a whole and the potential for your roster, most of your roster leaving for the NFL after this season, I got to think for him. What better time than now to leave, given everything that's going on with the investigations. Say they do win the national championship Monday night and you lose most of your best players. I think now would be the best time, and I certainly think the investigations play a factor. Absolutely.
What about the future for Michigan? Who do you think? Who's the heir apparent? Who's going to take over? Who's the odds-on favorite?
Yeah, I think internally it's certainly Sharon Moore, Michigan's offensive coordinator. He kind of handled the final 3 games of the regular season when Jim Harbaugh was suspended by the Big Ten. He's kind of been groomed as maybe that head coach in waiting, and he's handled himself well. Now he doesn't have any head coaching experience aside from this year, so that would probably be a concern. But he's been in the state of Michigan for a while now. He's well respected and beloved by the players. He's called plays now all the season. He's been coordinator the last couple. He's really helped develop Michigan's tight ends and offensive line since he's gotten Ann Arbor. So he certainly would be the favorite. I wouldn't surprise me if Michigan did open up some type of potential search for an outside candidate just to see who or what else is out there. But I think you'd be remiss to not say Sharon would be the front runner for the job.
There you go. All you need to know about Jim Harbaugh and the Michigan Wolverines coming up Monday, national championship game versus the Washington Huskies. Aaron McCann, Ann Arbor News, and also the Wolverine Confidential podcast. Thanks for being with us here on Sportsnaut.
Thanks for having me.